There is something specific happening in your mind right now. Something that has been building quietly for longer than you have been fully aware of. A pressure, a weight that does not always have a clear source. A pattern of thought that loops back to the same fears, the same doubts, the same worst-case versions of situations that may never actually materialize. And underneath all of it, a tiredness that is not about sleep, but about the sheer effort of carrying a mind that never fully rests. You are not broken, but something needs to change, and the change is more available to you than you currently believe. The way most people relate to their own thinking is the root of more suffering than almost anything else in human experience. Thoughts arrive and are immediately taken as truth. A thought about being inadequate feels like evidence of actual inadequacy. A thought about the future going badly feels like accurate prediction. A thought about being unloved feels like a statement of fact. The thought and the truth become indistinguishable, and once that collapse happens, the suffering that follows feels inevitable and permanent, when in reality it is neither. Your mind is a tool, an extraordinarily powerful one, capable of producing solutions, creativity, connection, beauty, and meaning. But like any tool, it can also cause damage when it is running without direction, without examination, without the kind of conscious relationship that separates you from the content of your own thinking. When the tool is running you instead of you running the tool, everything becomes harder. The anxiety increases. The negative loops deepen. The sense that you have no control over your own inner world grows until it becomes one of the defining experiences of daily life. This can change, and it changes through a specific kind of work that is less about adding new things and more about developing a fundamentally different relationship to what is already there. The starting point is a recognition that sounds simple, but carries profound implications when it actually lands. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who notices them. There is a you that exists prior to the content of any particular thought, a witnessing awareness that can observe what the mind is producing without being identical to it. Most people live their entire lives without ever fully experiencing this distinction, because the identification with thought is so total and so habitual that the idea of stepping outside of it seems meaningless or impossible. But the distinction is real, and the moment you begin to genuinely experience it, even briefly, the entire landscape of your inner life begins to shift. When a fear arrives, something can notice the fear rather than simply becoming it. When a painful thought appears, something can observe it with a degree of separation rather than immediately being flooded by the feeling it generates. That observing capacity does not eliminate the thought. It changes your relationship to it, and the change in relationship is where freedom begins. This is not a concept to be understood intellectually and then filed away. It is a practice to be developed through repeated return. Every time you catch yourself in a thought spiral and recognize what is happening, every time you step back even slightly from the content of a thought and see it as a mental event rather than an absolute truth, you are developing that capacity. You are training the muscle of witnessing awareness. And that muscle, developed over time, becomes one of the most stabilizing forces available in the entire architecture of a human mind. The body is not separate from the mind in this. This is a distinction that much of our thinking about mental health still has not fully absorbed. What happens in the mind is reflected in the body, and what happens in the body influences the mind with equal power. Chronic stress, anxiety, and negative thought patterns are not purely mental events. They have physiological signatures, patterns of tension, breath, posture, and nervous system activation that both reflect and reinforce the mental states they accompany. This matters practically because the body offers access points that purely mental interventions do not. You cannot always think your way out of an anxious state. The mind arguing with itself about whether there is a real reason to feel afraid rarely resolves the fear, because the fear was not produced by logic and cannot be dissolved by logic alone. But the body can be worked with directly. Slow, deliberate breathing activates physiological processes that genuinely shift the nervous system toward a state of greater calm. Physical movement processes the stress hormones that anxiety generates and gives the aroused nervous system somewhere to discharge its energy. Deliberate attention to physical sensation anchors awareness in the present moment in a way that mental effort alone cannot achieve. The relationship between mind and body in mental health is not metaphorical. It is biological, and treating the body as a relevant participant in the work of developing mental strength, rather than as irrelevant to the purely mental work of changing thought patterns, dramatically increases what becomes possible. There are also relational dimensions to mental health that deserve direct attention. The quality of the connections in your life has a measurable impact on your psychological state. This is not a soft observation. The research on this is among the most consistent in the entire field. Genuine connection, the experience of being known and accepted by other people, is one of the most powerful protective factors against mental suffering that exists. And its absence, chronic loneliness and social isolation, is among the most significant risk factors. This creates an uncomfortable challenge because the states that most strongly call for connection, depression, anxiety, shame, the sense of being fundamentally different from other people, are also the states that most powerfully drive withdrawal from it. When you feel your worst, the instinct is often to pull back, to protect yourself from the vulnerability of being seen in your difficulty, to manage the gap between how you feel and how you believe you are supposed to present yourself by simply removing yourself from situations where the gap would be visible. That withdrawal makes sense as a protective response, and it worsens the underlying condition by removing the relational contact that the underlying condition most needs. Breaking this pattern requires a willingness to be seen imperfectly, to let people who are safe enough know that you are not doing as well as you might appear, to reach for connection when the impulse is toward isolation, not because it always feels good in the moment, but because the research and the experience both confirm that it is consistently better than the alternative. You do not have to be fully transparent with everyone. You do not have to perform your vulnerability for people who have not demonstrated they can receive it well. But finding even one or two people with whom you can be honest about what your inner life actually contains, people who can sit with you in difficulty without needing you to resolve it quickly or perform recovery you do not yet feel, is one of the most stabilizing things available. If this work is speaking to something real in your life, there is a link in the description where you can support this project. Freely, only if it resonates. The people who have made this possible chose to invest in something they believed in, and that kind of genuine contribution is what keeps it reaching the people who need it. Sleep deserves specific attention because it is consistently underestimated as a factor in mental health. The relationship between sleep and psychological well-being is not incidental. Sleep is when the brain processes emotional experiences, consolidates memory, clears metabolic waste, and restores the regulatory capacity that governs how you respond to stress, difficulty, and challenge the following day. A mind operating on chronic insufficient sleep is a mind operating with significantly reduced capacity in exactly the domains that mental health most depends on: emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, the ability to maintain perspective when under pressure. Many people who are struggling psychologically are also sleeping poorly, and the two conditions reinforce each other in ways that make intervention difficult if sleep is not addressed. The anxious mind resists sleep. The poor sleep worsens anxiety. Without deliberate attention to improving the conditions for sleep, the cycle tends to continue regardless of other interventions. Consistent sleep and wake times, environments and habits that signal to the nervous system that the time for arousal has ended, the reduction of stimulating input in the period before sleep. These are not minor lifestyle adjustments. They are genuinely significant interventions in the conditions that make mental health possible. Movement belongs in the same category. The evidence on physical activity and mental health is extensive and consistent across populations and conditions. Movement is not a supplement to the real work of addressing mental suffering. For many people, it is among the most effective single interventions available, influencing neurochemistry, stress hormone levels, sleep quality, and the subjective experience of anxiety and low mood in ways that are measurable and significant. The research does not point toward any particular form of movement as uniquely valuable. It points toward consistency and regularity. Whatever form of movement you will actually do and sustain is the right form. There is something worth saying about the relationship between mental health and meaning, because this dimension of the conversation is often left out in favor of more technical or clinical framings. Humans are meaning-making creatures. We do not experience events as neutral occurrences to be processed and filed. We experience them as parts of a story that is either coherent or incoherent, that is either moving somewhere or going nowhere, that either matters or does not. And the quality of the story we are able to construct about our own lives has a profound effect on the quality of the psychological experience of living them. When life feels meaningless, when there is no sense of direction or purpose, when daily activity does not connect to anything that feels worth doing, when the future appears as an undifferentiated continuation of an unsatisfying present, the psychological consequences are significant and real. This is not weakness or ingratitude. It is a response to a genuine deprivation. Meaning is not a luxury. It is a psychological necessity. Building or rebuilding a sense of meaning often requires moving towards something that matters to you in ways that are genuinely chosen rather than simply inherited or performed. The things that create a feeling of meaning vary between people, but they almost always involve contribution of some kind, giving something of yourself to something beyond yourself, whether that is another person, a creative endeavor, a community, a cause, a vocation, or a practice that connects you to something larger. The movement toward what genuinely matters to you, even in small ways, even imperfectly, consistently produces something that purely symptomatic approaches to mental health cannot provide on their own. The link in the pinned comment is there for anyone who feels moved to support this work. What people have offered toward it has been given from genuine care, and that spirit is what has made it possible to keep reaching people at the moments that matter. A final truth worth sitting with as you carry all of this forward. The work of developing genuine mental strength is not linear. There will be periods of genuine progress followed by periods where old patterns return with surprising force. There will be days when everything you have been developing feels solid and accessible, and days when it feels as though none of it is available. This is not failure. It is the actual shape of the process. The setbacks are not evidence that the progress was not real. They are part of the terrain. And the ability to return, to recommit after a period of regression, to come back to the work without treating the departure as disqualifying, is itself one of the central capacities this work develops. You do not need to be perfect at this. You do not need to achieve some final state of mental health beyond which difficulty no longer arises. What becomes possible through this work is not the elimination of hard experiences. It is a fundamentally different relationship to them, one in which your capacity to meet what life brings is genuinely larger than it used to be, in which the difficult experiences pass through you rather than defining you, in which the internal resources you have developed provide real support in the moments that most require it. That is what is available. It is real, and it is built through exactly the kind of engagement you are bringing to this right now, honest, sustained, willing to look at what is actually there and work with it rather than around it. Keep going. The work is worth it, and you are more capable of it than you know.